Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing The Search for the Lost Species from Renegade Games. The Search for the Lost Species is a 1 to 4 player game of deduction, of trying to figure out exactly where the lost species is on this island over here, or alternatively on the other side of this board where there's a different island instead. This game is a prototype, all rules, components, and all that stuff subject to change, and I'll have a link to the Kickstarter campaign down below. Past that, this is a new version of The Search for Planet X, Renegade Games' very successful deduction game of trying to find the lost planet X in space, as players take turns taking various actions, utilizing their time as a resource in order to figure out where Planet X is, along with scoring other points along the way, since finding Planet X is not entirely the thing that makes you win, it's just one of many components that will help you win. And if you've played that, or if that made sense to you, that is basically what's going on here as well, except instead we are searching for the lost species. We are searching for one of several possible species. This is already a difference for Planet X. We'll cover the differences later, the main highlights, in case you have played them and you just want to know the overview. I'll have a timestamp to that down below. But over here, you're going to be picking one of several possible species. You're going to be picking which side of the board, the easier or the harder side. This is the slightly harder one. You'll be opening up your app, you'll be punching in those information, and then you'll generate a game code. A game code you can share with other players, or you could pass and play with the phone, but you will need that phone to take actions, to make deductions, to make guesses, to spend your economy of time in the game as you try to figure out where the lost species is, as well as everything else on the island. You see, the game operates with a few principles, a few rules. Every single one of these hexes has something. They either are going to have lories, cuscuses, toads, pythons. They're either empty or they have the lost species. Every single one of those is one of those things. An empty area is empty. There's nothing in it. The area with the lost species appears empty whenever you try to look in it, but it actually has the lost species. And since there's 5 empty areas and 1 lost species, that means 6 spaces on this island will look empty, but one of them isn't actually empty, and that is where the lost species is hiding. Past that, you'll have those 4 species: the lories, the toads, the cuscuses, and the python. Different amounts of each one, and different rules around how they operate. So, for example, the python we know is not next to any cuscus over there. So if you find a cuscus in this area, then you have the opportunity of knowing that there's not a python in any adjacent area, which means not here, 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 or here, although these 2 spaces are blocked by mountains, meaning they are not adjacent. These mountains add a degree of something else other than just pure hex on the board to block adjacency and get in the way in certain ways. And so you have these rules, and you have this sheet. This sheet over here will be marking information as you find it out. You'll be given a certain amount of starting facts, and this is one of those areas we can actually balance the game around people of different skill levels by giving them a drop more information. It may not seem like a lot of information. Most of your starting facts are going to be like, hey, there's not a python over here. But that could be enough that when you combine it with other facts, determines whether the python is here or is here, and can give you that piece of information you need to actually close things out. And so starting facts are a big deal, but past that, it's about the time economy of what you're doing in the game. You see, there's a bunch of core actions you can take, and one of the core actions is going to be, or 2 of the core actions are going to be different forms of scouting the land. You're going to have these actions over here. We're going to have a surveying by boat or by foot, which costs either 2 actions to survey by boat and 3 to survey by foot. But when you survey by boat, you're going to pick your person over here. You're going to spend 2 time actions, 1, 2, and then you'll move a minimum of 4 zones, possibly up to 6. You're allowed to backtrack and all that, but eventually you have to just choose areas you're going to be surveying. So you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then maybe 5, and maybe back 6, and then you'll go ahead and survey those areas. You have to pick up to a certain number of areas in the area that you traveled, a minimum of 4, and you say, I want to know if there's any pythons in that area. You're basically looking for a specific type of animal and you're trying to figure it out. You have a little boat wandering on the shore, scanning for tracks or this or whatever it is they're doing, and then ultimately the app will punch back, there are no pythons in that area. We'll grab our sheet over here, we'll go ahead and mark down, there's no pythons here, so we mark down no pythons, no pythons, no pythons, and no pythons. We have a drop more information as far as what's on the board, which eliminates certain options, and we're able to make more deductive guesses as far as more information being unlocked. Perhaps we then go ahead and do a survey by foot. We actually walk around the area and we go, you know what, I still want to see this python, so I'm going to spend 3 time actions, because I'm still behind the other player. The person behind always goes first. 1, 2, 3. And we go ahead and go 1, 2, 3. And I want to know if this python's here, here, or here. And it turns out that yes, indeed, there is 1 python in that area. And there's only 1 python on the entire board, so now we have a lot more information. So we go ahead and mark down on our board. And there's a few ways. There's certain shorthand as far as marking your actions and the result of your actions. So there's a shorthand in play as far as how you mark it. In the case of this right now, what I'm just going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to draw quick little lines so you can see this over here, showing that there is 1 python, little snakehead over there, are marking down that this is where that one python is. One of those 3 areas contains a python, which as we figure things out will tell us more information. So for example, if we later find a Cusco over here, then we know that this is not a python because pythons cannot be adjacent to Cuscos. And if later we do a survey and find out that this appears empty, well then it's either empty or the lost species, one of those two, but it's certainly not the python, which means the python is now over here and we can mark off the python in every other area of the board. You are taking actions to try to deduce things, and some of the actions are as simple as simply asking about information, but the real puzzle of the game comes down to trying to piece together pieces of information from different things you kind of figured out to become to a certain point where you're like, well, I know it can't be this, and I know it can't be this, and this is the best action to take that will give me the most pieces of information. There's going to be surveying, where you look for different species either by foot or by sea. There's going to be visiting a town, where you take one of these cards, getting potentially an ability, or potentially some sort of extra scoring points, or one-time actions, a whole stack of town abilities. But then you also get to go ahead and attend a conference, and you get to see, you know what, it turns out that we actually know that pythons are not across the mountains from, you know, toads. So you get extra piece of information that will feed into that puzzle, that gives you that little bit of information you need to cross things out, to eliminate what's there on the board. You'll be able to take a camera action over here, which we have, players have this camera token, and what they're going to do is they're going to drop it into a region. You can move 1, 2, 3, and you can say what's in that region. And when you do so, you'll find out whether the region appears empty. Again, appearing empty does not mean it's empty, or specifically that is a toad, that is I don't know, a lorry, or any of the various animal species in the game. And the last action, possibly the most important one, is where you spend 5 time units and you go ahead and look for the lost species. What you have to do is you have to pick a specific area on the board where you think the lost species is here, but then you also have to pick 2 adjacent areas from the, however many there are, you have to pick at least 2 and say, I think this and this are also there. That's to prevent, you know, players just kind of guessing into it without knowing the actual state of the island around them. And you go ahead and submit that, and that will be worth 12 points if you find it, and every player has potentially one more turn to go ahead and spend some of the remaining time to do one last thing. That's basically what you're doing in the game. Past that, there's going to be the expedition leader, who whenever the expedition leader is behind all the players, he's going to jump to the next area that is in this color, and then do potentially a few different things. Sometimes there's going to be various research conferences where you're going to learn more information, where all players will get more information at once. Sometimes you're getting various tokens back, your town token or your camera trap token, both of which are required for actions that you need them back, but will take those actions again. And the rest of the time, you're basically making certain guesses, so to speak. You're submitting your theory as to what is in a certain area. What you're going to do there is you using your own information, either knowledge of a certain fact that you know the toad is in that area, or alternatively you're pretty sure the toad is in one of these areas. However you want to do is up to you, but you'll submit up to 2, 0, 1, or 2 of your tokens, which will go onto the board saying, you know what, I think that there is a couscous over here, and I think there's a couscous over here. And you don't put that face up. You're going to put it face down so other players can't see it. You'll mark it with a specific round token in question of whatever token you're up to in the particular section that the expedition leader is up to. And then later, as the expedition leader continues to move around the board, a few turns later, they're going to go ahead and reveal those pieces of information, and you'll be able to submit in the app whether you are right or wrong. If you're right, you'll get points both for actually finding the couscous within the game, but also points for being the first person to do so. But if you're wrong, you'll lose a time unit. And so you're constantly submitting these guesses, which has players submitting evidence onto the island, which will slowly reveal things, confirming for other players who don't know what's going on right now, or alternatively disproving certain things. Information is being slowly generated one way or another through the things you do, through the things your opponents do, through everything that happens on the island as you ultimately attempt to find the lost species. That's basically the gameplay. It's deduction. It's deduction, taking actions, utilizing an app, going back and forth, until one player eventually triggers the end game, at which point you add up the points and see who won. As far as my review, starting off with ease of play, as far as what I like, don't like, ease of play, all that stuff, as far as ease of play, the overall rulebook for this is lengthy but very clear. The actions are laid out very specifically. The sequence and how everything works is laid out. If you're coming to this from the Search for Planet X, it is a very easy rules teach because it's basically the same system with a few small changes. But even if you're not, I think it's pretty easy to dive into. Again, it's not short. It's like 20 pages of rules to go through, a lot of flavor text, a lot of stuff about species and different things, but it's pretty procedural and clear, and the app does a good job guiding you as well. If you're ever uncertain, the app will mostly guide you through things. There's a few small language things that are not always the most clear. It's very precise in order to ensure you're getting the exact information, but sometimes things are not necessarily as clear as they could be in 1 or 2 instances. But overall, a pretty easy game to dive into. Plays in roughly an hour. Could be a little shorter, especially if you're playing 2-player solo, but roughly that time frame. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, At the beginning of this, at the end of the day, this is just a great deduction game. This carries forward what the Search for Planet X does while giving you just a puzzle of a board, a ton of facts that you have to take into account, a ton of information that's slowly being doled out to you in a way that is rewarding as you figure out how to combine it all in order to figure out where the lost species is. It's just a solid deduction game that plays great with other players, it plays great solo, and it just gives you, and it has replayability from today until tomorrow because it's all managed in the app. You have multiple lost species you're going to have two different sides of the board, which means give two different full board systems as far as how that runs. And then because of the players in play, the town cards in play, and the variable generation of the app, you just have a ton of ways the island can develop, of ways that you can have different facts and different things in play that guide you through the experience. There's just an absolute ton of replayability as far as how this game is going to play out every single time. So it's great deduction, great solo, great replayability, and for me, I think it just improves upon the original. This is where I'll actually talk about the differences between Search for Planet X and Search for the Lost Species, because to me, everything the Search for the Lost Species does, to me, is better than the original. First of all, thematically, I prefer the theme of the Lost Species. I prefer the theme of wandering an island and searching through space. It just feels more present to me. And it going in hand in hand with that more present aspect, having an explorer who's wandering around the board gives a certain sense of actually being on the island and having to manage that. And it's not necessarily as tight as all that. It was rare that I felt I couldn't get to where I wanted to go, but just having that physical presence on the board gave me enough of a time where I had to think through, okay, I want to kind of move to that part of the island, start searching there, and I'm also here. I'm not just arbitrarily scanning in space. I prefer that over here. The expedition leader system, the fact that you have an expedition leader slowly moving around the board, feels more intuitive than the way the planets rotated in the Search for Planet X. It just feels easier to track and easier to understand the timing of putting out tokens and getting them back and all that. There's also the fact that there's variable species. There's multiple species to search for, each with their own rule as far as how they operate, which changes the game in small, not hugely significant ways, but definitely changes the experience. We have the roof flying fox, who's not adjacent to the python. We're going to have the Sea Coops Owl, who's going to be not across the mountain from any lorry. Each of these have different small rules or adjustments as to how they operate, which is a nice spice of variability. We also have the town cards over here. These town cards are going to give you the additional aspect of these different abilities or point scoring things. Again, things that weren't in the original game that just add to the experience, do not in any way take away from it, at least for me, and I just like what they do. And then lastly is the variable terrain types. You're going to have different terrain types in the game that, again, give you something else to be there. So you might have rules in the game, such as, you know, the lost species is not on the same terrain type as the python. So the pythons are on the hills over here. We know the lost species has to be on an outer edge, and when you combine that with other pieces of information, that just gives you more stuff. To me, Search for Planet X, Search for the Lost Species, takes the core game of Search for Planet X, and it just improves upon it in a bunch of different ways. To me, there's not a single part of it that's worse. It's just all better. As far as what I don't like in the game, really, it's going to be the one complaint I had against the Search for Planet X, and it's still true over here, which is to a large extent, this game feels like multiplayer solitaire. And I'll give a caveat to that in a second. But to a large extent, when you play through the game, I have my app, you have your app, I'm taking my action, you're taking your action, we're going back and forth, taking our actions, I'm waiting for you to be done with your turn so I can take my next action. It feels very much like multiplayer solitaire, two people staring at the board with their phones in front of them as they take their actions, as they do their thing. It is rewarding. I enjoy it. I overall like the system, but something about having multiple people at the table staring at their phones, going back and forth, waiting for the other person to stare at their phone, it makes it feel more so than, I don't have a problem with multiplayer solitaire in general. The multiplayer solitaire, for those who don't know, is a term where multiple people are engaged in a game, but they're kind of doing their own race, their own puzzle, and at the end you compare and see who won, but there's less interaction in the game. And I think that for me, again, caveat coming, the Search for the Lost Species still has that problem where it feels like multiplayer solitaire. It feels like I'm doing my own thing, and that problem is made worse because of the fact that my own thing involves staring at my phone. So you have players around the table literally waiting for their turn to stare at their phone, which makes you feel less present in a social experience compared to other games compared to the way most other games would for me. The caveat I'll give there is that I do know that there are players who are more mindful of what you're doing on your turn. What you do on your turn matters to me more, and I'm really reading into the clues, and you did this kind of search here, and then you did this over here, and so I can really kind of deduce from what you are and aren't doing what the information I need is. And I'll acknowledge that very, very well may be true. But every game I've played of Search for Planet X and every game I've played of Search for the Lost Species, for me, has mostly had players feeling like they're doing their own thing. If you're playing at a different level, could well be much more interactive. For me, it doesn't feel that way. As far as what I can see others not liking, a few small things there. First of all, the general tracking aspect of how you track the presence of your theories and how you flip them over. While I do think it's better and more intuitive than Search for Planet X, I still think it has room for a drop of confusion in there. Additionally, there's the aspect of just in this game, and again, this is true for both games, but you are just tracking things on a pad all the time. You're marking things down. This is there, that's not there, and learning how to track some things is pretty easy. Learning how to track that there is a lorry in this area is pretty easy to do. Learning how to track where you have variable piece of information, like there is a python in one of these 4 areas, but there's not a couscous in one of these 5 areas, and trying to figure out how to track that. The game gives you a shorthand. It's not necessarily the most intuitive, and trying to just find all the information on a sheet could be a lot, and you might not enjoy that. And then to double up on that, if you make any mistakes in your tracking, if you accidentally say that the python cannot be here when really it could, that can mess up your entire puzzle. Your entire puzzle of everything you've written down can fall to pieces as soon as you accidentally record the wrong piece of information or deduce the wrong fact, which means a single missed call can have your entire thing fall apart like a house of cards, and you may not like that. I don't mind it. It just means you have to track things accurately and be as precise as possible, but it could be frustrating to have your entire game be resting on a single wrong fact that you accidentally did earlier in the game, or even if you got the wrong terrain type. I will say the game does a great job of giving you different sheets, so you can kind of orient the sheets based on how you're facing the board. It's all different sides, so you have that ability to say, hey, you know, I'm facing from this angle, and therefore I have that knowledge. But again, while that makes it less likely you'll make a mistake, a single mistake can kind of ruin you. And then lastly, this game is app-driven. I don't love app-driven games. I would say that, for me, I mostly don't mind it here. The difference is because of the multiplayer solitaire aspect, it kind of leans into the feeling of distance. That's the only caveat I have there. So I don't know if it's as much about the app as about the other circumstances, but it is app-driven. Walk into the game understanding that. As far as final thoughts on the Search for the Lost Species, I overall enjoyed this game. I have one critique, and it is a big one. That multiplayer solitaire combined with the staring at the phone, it does take away from the experience to a degree, and you could play it solo, but I just have more fun racing other players as opposed to racing, well, the app. For me, I like this most at 2 players. I've played at different player counts, and it's fun at all player counts. It's fun because the game is fun, but to me it thrives at 2 because I have the sense of racing with another player, and once we're not heavily engaging or as being as social of an experience as some other games, I'd rather just have faster turns and faster going back to my turn so I can do the next thing that I'm trying to do. I think it's an excellent deduction game that is incredible in so many ways, has a lot of strength to it, and has that big one drawback that is a factor in how much I enjoy it. And for me, it just improves on the Search for Planet X, like I mentioned already. Everything about this game is simply better, from theme to mechanics to everything they added to the experience. For me, it's a 4 out of 5. An excellent deduction game, with a caveat that is a big one, but still doesn't stop me from enjoying the game. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, and obviously, the Search for Planet X. If you like this game, they have a lot of overlap, and you might find that you prefer one over the other differently than I do. And then secondly, I'd say 2 other deduction games that I really enjoy. Paint the Roses from North Star Game is a cooperative deduction game where you're trying to figure out how to put different things into the garden before the queen murders your head. And then lastly, Tiwanuku, a game that's not out yet but should be out shortly. Tiwanuku to me is one of my favorite deduction games. Competitive in what it's doing, but ultimately just watching people plant crops and figure out what goes in different areas and how it all combines is just an incredibly rewarding experience that, despite being competitive, often just feels enjoyable and rewarding to play and deduce together with others. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.